So welcome everybody, great to be here. There is a bit of a mystery about the title of this session, I think, because as you heard, we do think it's called Rewiring the State, Insights from Permanent Secretaries. You might have something slightly different on the printed agenda about unlocking the power of AI. We will be covering that. It comes underneath the kind of broader topic that we're covering. Just to give you a little bit of context, as you heard, I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK civil servant, but I'm now an advisor to Global Government Forum. And Global Government Forum, they work with senior civil servants in the UK and all around the world to help them build their expertise, to create networks and really support them in kind of meeting those global challenges that they're all facing. We do webinars, events, and we do lots of research, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And I have here with me, as you heard, Yatin Mahandri, who is from Cognizant. He's the VP and Head of Public Sector and Health for Cognizant. Yatin works across the private and the public sector, but on large-scale transformation programs, really focusing on how those organisations can use advances in technology to help improve the outcomes for their customers and their citizens. And Global Government Forum and Cognizant with Yatin, we've worked together on several research projects. And the one that we want to give you a bit of a teaser about today is we will be publishing later this month a really unique study. I think it's the first time anything like this has been done. We were really pleased to get the support of the former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Gus O'Donnell, and we spoke to and interviewed 12 serving permanent secretaries from the major government departments to ask them about their thoughts on rewiring the state and what they really thought about transformation and digital transformation. And we've done reports before with digital leaders, but we were really excited to talk to permanent secretaries because they're in this unique position where they have to bring together all of those challenges around political kind of priorities, working with ministers, the budgetary constraints, all of those other challenges, with trying to bring around all of this change and digital change. So if you're interested in the study, in the report, please do go to Cognizant's stand after this and sign up, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the report when it's published. But we're going to do a bit of a strange thing because we were both involved in the report, but I'm going to chat to Yatin about the report. But you've been sat here for a long time now, kind of just listening. So we want to make sure there's time for you to ask questions as well. And I know we're the last thing between you and lunch, so we will try and end on time. But please, if you've got questions while we're talking, put your hand up. But we will kind of allow some time at the end to bring you in as well. But my first question really, Yatin, to you is, as I say, you've worked with Global Government Forum before, but why were you so interested in this particular study?
So our interest was because of a couple of key reasons. One is Cognizant, we're relatively new to government, about 6 years into our journey. We've grown really rapidly. There's 2,000 of us now serving government across all different sectors, transport, MOD, NHS, you name it. So part of it is, of course, about us getting to know government and getting our brand out there too. The second reason was that last year I worked with Kevin Cunnington, now in GGF. We did a report on the readiness of government for AI and the underlying data structures. A lot of the CDIOs participated from the major departments of state. And what we thought that this year would be a good follow-up was to get the view of the permanent secretaries. And to do that, we weren't going to rely on my personal charisma because that's not too much, but Lord Gus was available. And of course, he has great access, he has that reputation, and he led that study for us. So we also had a lot of support from our partner AWS, so John Davis, my counterpart at AWS. We just felt this was a very good insight to get. We started out with missions, if you recall, and it then evolved a little bit as to where are the missions and where do they sit in the minds of the permanent secretaries. So I think that's a good part of the report when that comes out, where their minds are at on it.
Yeah, brilliant. And we did think it would be hard to get the permanent secretaries to kind of dedicate time to this, but it just shows how important they believe this to be, because we actually did get all of them.
Yes, and they were generous with their time.
So the report, we've made kind of 4 key recommendations in the report, and they're around leadership for digital transformation. They're looking at building capability across government, unlocking data and AI, and then how do you drive a more joined up approach? Because a lot of this isn't really about the technology at all, it's about changing culture. So just Yatin, on leadership, we did ask all of our permanent secretaries, obviously they're the most senior official in the department, we asked them about leadership of digital transformation, and from what you heard from those permanent secretaries, kind of what do you think is going well on digital leadership, and what does good digital leadership look like in the civil service?
So that was a deliberate question from us between Lord Gus and GGF, in the sense that when you're dealing with the commercial sector, in our case it's usually fortune companies, they will have digital right at the heart of their board or their exco. And what we'd observed across different departments was different patterns, and I know Emily spoke about it this morning. At the time we did the interviews, that hadn't happened, which was the recommendation that says have the non-execs. So the more perm-secs who were in trend with what was happening definitely had the non-exec capability on digital. And also they had put their digital leader on their exco or their board equivalent, putting the digital transformation at the heart of the government services that they're discharging to us, the citizen. And that was the difference we observed. And since that piece of work, as Emily said today, there's been some moves and there's recommendations. So I think to answer the latter point, what we found is good digital leadership is having that individual at that exco level, because they're part of driving your agenda, and we find that whether it's in retail, telco, or elsewhere. So I think in government too, with the drive that we've got now laterally towards AI, I must have a chat about that definition of AI with Tussell later on. But the key part of that is having that leadership right there with you in the exco and the boardroom.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that came up is there needs to be a shift in terms of seeing digital as a core capability across the civil service. We aren't quite there yet, and you would expect your leaders in any government department to have a real grasp of HR function, of kind of finance functions. And there is still a way to go in terms of senior leaders really understanding what's going on the digital and data side of things. So that was certainly an area where permanent secretaries knew there was more work to be done.
Yes, I agree. I think they flagged, as you probably recall, one was some of that was themselves learning more about it. I think they were very open about that. And also, shall we say, educating policymakers too.
Yeah. So the second kind of recommendation we made was around building capability, and I think all of the interviewees, all of the perm secs that we spoke to, recognised how fast everything's moving. There was recognition that the public sector government, central government, is lagging behind the private sector in a lot of areas on digital. So what are your thoughts from what you heard on kind of how they should approach building that capability, both internally but also with kind of external partnerships?
So there were three things that came across to me as an observer. I think one was definitely around the training and the education available to skill people up. And I know from our experience, we have a lot of government departments coming into our Bishopsgate office where we run tutorials on prompt engineering and so on. So it's not a lack of appetite in individuals to come and do that. But that was part of the process that I think they saw that needed to happen. The second one was, as usual, about the pay scales to attract people versus the private sector. That challenge and that tension's always there. I think the third part that was interesting was the role of the private sector in delivering this. And one aspect was, should we be insourcing everything and hiring ourselves? So there's that drive going on. And then there's also the drive that you want to get the result and transfer some of the risk. So part of the dilemma we were picking up when Uri and Gus were leading that was, what is that definition? Because we as the private sector would, of course, be interested in outcome-based opportunities, take risk, deliver to that. That part of it was the third part that I think still needs clarity from that perspective.
And there was some interesting, we can't give away everything, obviously, because the report will be published.
And it was all Chatham House rules, so don't ask me afterwards.
So we can't say who said what, but there was several people said ministers also need to play a role in this, in that it would be great if ministers had better understanding and training on digital matters, and also that training and upskilling shouldn't only apply to people who want to come in on a specialist route, on the technology route. Actually, you need to improve digital literacy across the civil service, across all professions. So should there be some kind of mandatory training for civil servants? And then I think the other thing, and again, we wouldn't attribute this to anybody, but there are some people who thought there's kind of maybe a generation or a kind of hierarchy where it's almost a lost cause, it's too late for them, and should you be focusing your efforts on kind of middle managers in terms of building the future digital leaders?
There was that. I had a lot of empathy with the former, actually.
Yeah. So the third area, this is where I think there's a lot in the report of really tangible kind of recommendations, and this was on unlocking data and AI. And I think all of the permanent secretaries recognise that if you want to embrace AI, if you want to really be transformative, you have to get the foundations right around your data and your data management. So did anything surprise you in terms of what we heard from the interviews when it comes to kind of the data challenges and some of the good things, some of the good use cases that came out?
Sure. So I think as Cognizant, when we entered the market 6 or 7 years ago, that was one of the first things we did. We published a white paper on data sharing. Data was our entry point into the market. So I've seen it evolve over a period of years, and it is definitely better than 5 or 6 years ago. But we were still seeing challenges from the perm secs in terms of sharing data between departments. Sometimes legal obligations have to be put in place, and that's a challenge. And so I think they did see that. They also saw the opportunity of, for example, the National Data Library. You comment too, it didn't feel so strong in their mind with some of them that this was going to happen, and it would create some form of interaccessibility between departments. And that was the slight vagueness. But yes, data sharing is still a challenge, I think. Yeah,
and one of the things I think that we heard is there was a difference between how well government, and I'd be interested in thoughts from the wider public sector in the room as well, but how well governments are using new technologies to drive efficiencies internally, and there's quite a few good examples of where that's happening, and we've heard today Copilot and using things like that. But actually, there's still so much more that could be done to use new technologies to really drive transformation in public service delivery. And that requires data linking and data sharing in a whole nother level. And there was frustration, I think, around some of the people that we spoke to that that's still not happening. And whether those barriers to sharing data, as you say, are real ones, are legislation or regulation, or whether they're more cultural issues around perception and can you share this data, or what's the cost of sharing that data? If you own the data and someone else gets the benefit from sharing that data, why should you do it? What's your motivation? All those kind of issues. And I think the biggest thing for me that came out of the report was it's kind of baby steps at the moment, and we're missing a trick on this opportunity to do these really transformative things if we got the foundations right.
Yeah, I agree. That did come across strongly.
Yeah. And then the final area that we talked about, and I guess I've touched on it a little bit there, is driving up a joined-up approach. And what's the role of the digital centre? And I know we've heard, I think you heard earlier this morning from people who sit in the digital...
Emily Middleton was here talking about.
Yeah. So we spent quite a lot of time in the interviews talking about this with the permanent secretaries, including how willing or able they and their colleagues are to work across silos, to work across those departmental silos, but also what's the role of the centre in helping to facilitate some of this. So what are your thoughts on, again, what's working well?
Sure. So I think the view we picked up from the permanent secretaries, and Emily did address some of those already, so I think DCIT have plans to do that, was, at least my view, and it is my opinion, was around the clarity of what the centre is actually going to do. Is it going to just deliver the guidelines and then the departments individually are implementing those? Is it going to take a more forceful approach and maybe mandate ways of doing it and then be the delivery arm too? I think that delineation wasn't clear to all of them. There was a feeling, I think, that they'd welcome a stronger steer from the centre too, in terms of what DCIT are going to do about the National Data Library, what does AI mean by department, and I think there are plans and so on in place, but perhaps what they're looking for is more of the action-oriented aspect, is how it came across to me.
And again, I think some of the barriers that we heard about joined-up government are the way the civil service is structured in the UK it's very much, it's a silo structure. So you are the accounting officer if you're the permanent secretary, you report to your minister, you're funded in the spending review in a vertical way, not in a horizontal way. And actually none of that system works for digital transformation, which actually needs a horizontal approach and it needs that joining up. So there was a real sense that we need to step back a little bit and is there a different way of doing this? And we didn't get the solutions maybe in the report, but lots of thoughts about what needs to be done.
Yes, I agree. I think there was definitely that view. If you're going to rewire the states, and if you recall, we started out with the missions to explore how they felt data and digital would deliver the missions, and that sort of felt not as concrete towards the end. It became much more about how do we rewire across the different silos, and there needs to be that direction. So that was a strong feeling.
And just finally, before we come to the audience, I think one of the other things that came out very clearly, and it was mentioned in the tussle presentation that we just heard, is that tension between immediate priorities and the long-term kind of investment that you need for digital transformation. And nobody more than a permanent secretary, I think, feels that tension because they are having to work with their ministers. And the reality is, you'll see, we just had a reshuffle. Those new ministers coming in now will have their own new now priorities. And again, that will distract for a little bit, or not distract, but it will take up the time and the attention of the senior officials. And at the same time, the civil service and the senior officials have to play that stewardship role where they have to argue for and put the business case for long-term investment. And that's what's required for the kind of digital foundations. And I think that tension really came out in some ways.
It was really evident, wasn't it? And I think I won't pretend, even though I've dealt with government for too many decades, that I understand the financing cycle. But that seemed to be a real source of frustration in terms of how programs are funded, how business cases are agreed, and sometimes the number of loops that the permanent secretary is having to put his whole or her organisation through to get signed up to something they feel is important was also very much there.
I don't want to sound like it was all negative. It's not all negative. It's a very positive report in that it shows the opportunities, and it also has some good examples in there of where data and digital and AI are already being used.
Justice, HMRC, DWP, everyone had great examples. So I didn't feel that the permanent secretaries were necessarily being negative. I think what it felt like to me was they could actually see the opportunity, and what we were hearing was the frustration about grasping that opportunity rather than it's all terrible. They could see examples of what is being done, and they were very positive about the digital community too.
Yeah. So we've got a question there, and I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. We've got a question there and a question here. I don't know if we've got mics in the room. Gentleman there and then lady here at the front.
Who had their hand up?
Just behind you.
Hi, thank you. Neil McIver, ex-senior civil servant, used to be chief data officer in 2 major government departments. Great report, I'm really looking forward to reading it. I think the $64,000 question for me, though, is do permanent secretaries and ministers actually know what good digital and data leadership looks like?
So hi Neil, good to see you again.
Would you like me to take that first?
You take that first.
In my view, and I've dealt with enough private sector organisations as well over my too long career, most of them had a pretty good view, and some of them were very lucky to have also transformational type CDIOs, even people who've had a hybrid career come from the private sector into the public sector. Not everybody makes that move successfully, as you'll know, but they have. So I think they had a view of who that transformative individual can be. And of course you get views on who is and who isn't, but I think they all had a good view of what they needed as a catalyst for change.
Yeah, I would agree. I think most of them understood the potential. I think there were some that really stood out in actually understanding the transformation that could happen if you get this right. And I think that's the step change that we need, is some of them are still at the stage where they are thinking more about how can digital help their department? How can AI help their department? Whereas the ones who really understand digital leadership understand how you can fundamentally change public service delivery in this country if you change the structures and change the system. And I don't think all of them are in that space yet, but it was nice to see that several of them were. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nancy Scott from Hoptroff. We're a precision timing company in SME. Was there any talk about the infrastructure side of things? Because a lot of this is about application level. But if we don't have good data centres, network engineering, timing infrastructure for precision timing of information, and that's traceable, if the information's not clean, organised, then nothing works in terms of AI, whatever else you want to do. Was there any mention of that?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
So that definitely came across. There was a variability depending on the permanent secretary that we would be speaking to. A lot of them were very switched on to that. They were very conscious of legacy. They were also very conscious of my favourite fact that I must bore you with, because everybody talks about Estonia, and my favourite fact is that that's about 5 London boroughs in terms of population, and we have a national insurance system that goes back to the days of Beveridge. So it's not a clean sheet of paper. So they absolutely had that view about the infrastructure, about the legacy, but also the view of the challenges of that movement. How fast can you do it? Where will the funding come from? Because I think a lot of them were focused on the practical problems too. But they absolutely got that argument.
Big vulnerabilities around GPS, satellite jamming and spoofing, which
That cyber came up a
the
lot.
people that in the know are really talking about it, but I don't know how much local government are really aware about how much this hacking can be preempted by good quality
I totally get that.
networking.
The departments that we interviewed, and all the large ones participated, they were very aware of what you've just said, the permanent secretaries. Because if something happens, it usually ends up on his or her desk fairly quickly in terms of security and legacy issues. What they can do about it is the challenge, I think.
And I think, as with so many issues, so yeah, I agree, they were definitely aware of the infrastructure issues and needing, so I think they were aware of the risk of trying to jump to AI solutions when you don't have the foundations in place, when you don't have the right systems, when you don't have the data that you need in place. I think a lot of them were, the challenge for them is, how do you safely address your legacy issues? How do you do it with the money, the funding that you have? And as with so many of the issues we discussed, there was, there could be a lot more done in terms of sharing lessons learned from people who have done it and are doing it well. And that seemed to be a recurring issue, in that if more could be done to share good practice, you could do this in a much more efficient and effective way. No, differently, yeah.
Fair point.
But that comes back to building a business case with ministers who, even if your permanent secretary understands the need for digital investment in infrastructure and things like that, it's not that sexy for some of your ministers, because they're not going to see that result within the next parliamentary term. So that's always a tricky conversation. Yeah. Yeah.
I think one last one.
No pressure, it's got to be a good one before lunch.
Hi. Thanks, really, really interesting. I just wondered if there was any thought whether this sort of research might be extended to include chief officers in regions. So, for example, Mayoral Strategic Authority chief officers. I asked that in a biased way. I'm from Greater Manchester Combined Authority. And I'm sort of reflecting on this morning's conversation. I think a lot of the opportunity here about rewiring the state is in place and is in how we join up, and we are really truly person-centred. Owen's sort of reminding us this morning about total place. Devolution is the start of that, and I sort of was reflecting on whether, if we considered place, we might think about how data might be devolved rather than joined up at a national level. So really appreciate your thoughts on where this research could go next.
So I think that's a great question, because that part of the devolution agenda and the regionalisation of services is something we are going to get active on. We're going to meet Liverpool and hopefully Manchester at conference. Am I allowed to say conference?
Yes, sure.
Just check with Siobhan, I can say that. I think that's really part of the emerging agenda, so it would be a natural next step to see where that research takes us. Because that is what's missing, I think, and I'll get off my soapbox, but we're so excited to work with people like MHCLG because that crossover between local and central, we've never quite made it work.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and we'll certainly take that back. I'll take that back with GGF in terms of where the research might go next, but from a perm sex point of view, they definitely were aware of,
Yes.
they have a kind of internal focus on their departments, but they also understand the role that new technology can play in their wider policy landscape. So for housing and community, they would certainly be thinking about the local government and regional issues as well. But yeah, it's a big landscape for them. Yeah. I think we are out of time. I think we've just been told, was that the final question? So just to say thank you so much for the questions, but if you are, I think the report, as I say, is unique. I don't think anybody's ever interviewed sitting permanent secretaries in this way. So if you would like to receive a copy, please do come along to the Cognizant booth just outside, and I think we'll capture your details, and then you'll be able to get a report. I think it's going to come out just before the Labour conference.
Yes, 25th of September is when we're going to publish it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you very much.